Hello there, my name is Tuomas, this is Sound of Free, and in this video I'm gonna be talking about the Knebworth 1980 show by the Beach Boys. This was released in the early 2000s, was it 2002 originally, but yeah, it comes from 1980, the summer European tour. They played a handful of shows in Scandinavia, and one show was in Holland and a few shows in England, but it was a relatively small tour. The show was released on DVD, and then you can also find it on CD, and it's on streaming. I believe it's on YouTube as well, but if you want to see it on the best quality possible, look out for the DVD. It was filmed on tape, so the quality isn't that great, but it is much better on the DVD itself than what you can see on YouTube. If you don't know, I've been doing sort of chronologically Beach Boys album reviews, but now I've been kind of taking a break because the next one is going to be Sunflower, and that's sort of a different era for the group. And in between this break I've been reviewing all of the official Beach Boys live albums. So right now I'm doing the Knebworth show. Last time I did the In Concert from 1973. But as with each of those, I've been kind of giving a little bit of backstory for the sort of the era and the concert. And the same thing is gonna happen right now. So before I dive into the concert itself, anyway, just sort of random recommendation. The Beach Boys in Concert by Ian Rustin and Jon Stebbins is probably my all-time favorite Beach Boys related book. This is just so great. It's filled with amazing photos that you don't see anywhere else. Photos by Ed Roach, for example, and like a lot of these pictures are something that haven't been really used in printed media elsewhere. So there is a lot of, even though I've read this and then back to back, and then sometimes I like to go back to it and sort of just search through and check out some sort of tidbits and stuff, and I'm always sort of surprised by all of the images. It's like for example this one over here with John Stamos. It's like, wow, I've never seen this one before, because it's filled with these sort of great images. This book describes in a pretty good detail. Here's a cool picture of Brian by Brannon Tommy. Never seen this one elsewhere. Describes this era of the Beach Boys in a very truthful, honest way, because the early 80s and the late 70s for the group were the worst times for them, both professionally and also in their private lives, especially for the Wilsons. The problems that Brian and Dennis were dealing with in their personal lives around that time period, obviously they reflected on the whole group as well and the quality of the performances. But they had many different major issues as well outside of those two people too. For example, by the late 70s, well, let's back off a little bit. 74, Endless Summer came out, huge success fell upon them, and people suddenly came to their shows once again, and they wanted to hear those early 60s hits. So they started to please the audiences, the new audiences that came, because for many years their shows were kind of low-key, and they were playing a lot of new stuff. And by the early 70s they started to gain a new sort of following, but then it all changed with the success of Endless Summer, and then they had the Brian's Back campaign. But anyway, like they started to get a bit lazy on stage. They started to bring back more backing musicians, which wasn't always a bad thing. They had great people there, like Charles Lloyd, the great jazz player, and a lot of keyboardists, and they had a lot of people on stage, and it started to be pretty expensive for them. And by the late 70s, as that success started not necessarily fade away, but it just wasn't that profitable anymore. They released MIU, then they did, Love You was a flop already, and then they had MIU, then they had LA, and keeping the summer alive in 1980. At the end of 79, according at least to this book, was just a horrible year for them on stage. They had to get rid of a lot of those backing musicians. Carl was super sort of disappointed for that situation because he always had his eye on that. He wanted to be a professional, and he wanted that to be the way that the Beach Boys was seen at, but that wasn't the case during this time period, and rightfully so, because they had gone lazy, and Carl really insisted that they start to rehearse more and tighten up the group and do a lot of work to improve their sound and their quality of their performances. And they truly did improve when it came to 1980. But one other big thing that happened in 1979 was that Dennis was spiraling really hard. He couldn't be relied on stage, and his alcohol problem and drug problems just started to be impossible to deal with. I believe in 1979, probably at the end of the year, he had a fight on stage with Mike, and that was sort of that last straw, and they decided to actually fire him. So Dennis Wilson was fired from the Beach Boys. But anyway, they started to improve their show and rehearsed, and by the summer of 1980, Dennis had been out of the group for almost a year, like over 6 months anyway. And anyway, he then came back and they did the little European tour. Their sound and their whole stage show had improved a lot from 1979. At least that's what I hear from the books and the stories. I wasn't obviously there in 1979 or 1980. But, and there's nothing officially released, like shows from 1979, so I cannot compare them in that sense. But anyway, 1980, summer tour, Europe, Dennis came back, and he wasn't cleaned up completely, but he was in better shape than he was in the late 70s, at least sometimes. And the European tour, what I hear from, or what I read from this book over here, was pretty successful. Like, the reviews were pretty good, and the shows seemed to do really well, and the audiences really loved them. Last time they were in Europe was, I believe, in 72. And a lot of these countries that they played on, like Sweden and Norway, was probably the first time they were ever. And in Sweden they were playing the first time in like 15 years or something like that. They were in the mid-60s there the last time. So people really, audiences loved them, their responses were great. And that European tour ended with the Knebworth show near London, this sort of Castle Park place. And it was an outdoor show. There were several, it was sort of a festival, so there was different players as well. I believe Santana was probably there, and if I remember correctly, and some other groups and artists as well. But the Beach Boys were kind of the headliners. In a traditional Beach Boys way, after the show, when they came back home, they did in the late autumn or autumn time, they did some sort of sweetening to the concert. So I don't know, like, it's hard to, it's not easy to notice what they changed, but they did do some sort of sweetenings here and there to the vocals at least. If you know more greatly what they did do in a studio afterwards, I would love to know. But anyway, this is not the full show. This stuff that is released officially isn't the full show. They cut off, for example, Bruce Johnston performing I Write the Songs. And I think they cut out Santa Ana Wins, maybe. But anyway, like a few tunes they cut off. Concert was kept at 21st June. Yeah, June, because then about a week later they played the 4th of July show in Washington, and that was a great success. That was the biggest crowd that they had ever played before, and that's a great show as well. It's very similar, this one, the sound and the performances and the set list, it's all very similar to this one. Main difference is probably that it's day in that one, and here it's pretty dark, and Dennis has shaved and he's sort of wasted. here he is in a lot better shape. But otherwise it's a very similar show. Highly suggest you to check that out as well. You can probably find it on YouTube, but I don't think it probably has never been officially released, which is a shame. But it was broadcasted on TV. Dennis Wilson's drumming and his whole persona on this show. He's the star of this show. No matter if it's singing background vocals, because his only lead vocal on it is You're So Beautiful. Even that one is just a little snippet. But otherwise he's in the backgrounds very prominent. In a tune or two he plays piano, but he's drumming and he's yelling and he's cheerleading and whatever he's doing on stage. Looking at this show, and if you knew nothing of Dennis and his problems, you'd never think that that guy has any issues. Like, he's so amazing, he's charismatic, he looks great, he looks healthy, and he's sort of just a leader on stage. And he's killing it on whatever he's doing. If he's cheerleading, thanking the audience, drumming, running around, doing funny stuff. Whatever he's doing, he's just always sort of the sound that your ear is gravitating towards to. Or if you're looking at the video, it's like that's the guy that you're looking at, you know. He's just such a charismatic character over here, and I love to listen to his drumming because his drumming over here is exceptionally good. We all know Dennis wasn't technically a great drummer, but to me he's very similar to Ringo. But Ringo probably was technically, and he's probably a better drummer, you know, technique wise, but they both have unique styles that fit their groups perfectly. But anyway, let's get back to this show itself. Dennis's drum fills over here are just so Dennis. They are sometimes so offbeat and so unique. They are simple, and the timing is weird. His drumming is sort of, it doesn't fall apart anytime. He's somehow just the right way off. I mean, it's hard to describe because I'm not a musical theorist. I don't really have that vocabulary, but I can hear sometimes that his drumming is sort of off, and his rhythm is sometimes kind of strange, and especially with the fills, but somehow that just fits the music perfectly. It's just somehow in his soul or in his spine, and he knows where to sort of hit those. I don't know, it works. It truly works. And Carl's vocals throughout this show, no matter what the track is, or like he sings his heart out on this one. He's really into it. And I mentioned this in the previous review too, but especially Keeping the Summer Alive, the track, and the way he sings it, and Darling over here as well, and a lot of little moments here and there. He's really like giving it all, and I love that. He is great on this show. Well, then one of my notions over here is Al Jardine looks like a pimp, which is, but he kind of does. He has that full outfit with the hat and all. It's kind of weird. But anyway, Al Jardine is super solid on this one. Each time he sings leads, he's nailing it, and he's very prominent on the backgrounds, and you know, he's super solid. You can just count on him, and he's giving a great show over here. I love Mike's banter throughout this show between songs. He's very classy here. He doesn't do his usual sort of square jokes, you know, whatever you want to call them, or his sarcastic jokes. I think he's very, you know, thoughtful with his speeches over here, and he doesn't talk too much, and when he talks he just says the right words, and that's it, and then the songs start, and you know, we move on, and you know, I love that because he's a great frontman over here. I might even say this show you see Mike at his best in a way. He's vocally, he's great, and he has just the right energy. And Brian is here with them too. I don't know if I remember to mention that in the beginning, but anyway, this is like the first officially released live concert with the Beach Boys with Brian, with the group, performing since the concert album from '64, and you know, it's crazy to think that this is the same band, but it truly is. We have the original members on stage, but everything is different. Brian is very prominent on this one, not vocally, but he's playing keys throughout the show. I'm not sure how audible he is on a lot of the songs. I know that during this tour a lot of times they did sort of just hide him in the mix, or even just mute him sometimes, because he liked to play his own songs. If the band was playing Help Me Rhonda, he liked to play like Be My Baby or something, like kind of sometimes weird stuff. But I believe he's prominent and audible on, for example, God Only Knows over here, and a couple other tracks as well, because when you look at the video, you can actually see what he's playing, and you can hear that. So I'm pretty sure he is prominent, and he looks reasonably excited and into the show as well. He's probably the least excited when he's singing Sloop John B, which was pretty much the only lead vocal that he gets over here. And I think, yeah, he sings the bridge on Surfer Girl as well, but that's it. Rest of the show, when he doesn't have to sing lead, he really seems to be very into it. And even with a lot of the rockers, he really, you know, bobbing his head with the music and kind of rocking out, so that's cool. I'm not gonna go through this track by track, because I would just say the similar things with a lot of the tracks, but Darling is a highlight. School Days I prefer more than the album version from Keeping the Summer Alive. God Only Knows is a great rendition over here. Car's vocals are classic, and like I mentioned, Brian, I believe, is audible on the keys. Be True to Your School is probably my favorite version of the whole song. Mike doesn't yet do his when thing, which I despise. I don't like that at all. So, you know, it rocks. It rocks really hard. Mike's vocals are great, and I actually like the melody, especially the verses. I like the melody a lot of the song. Somehow I just never really liked that much the studio version, either of them, you know, the single or the album version. But this one I really love. It really rocks. And there's a great organ solo by Mike Meros over here. And Mike plays a lot of keys and, you know, organ and stuff. He's very prominent on this whole album. I love his little, you know, things that he adds. He's sort of jamming around and letting it loose here and there. His parts, like for example the organ solo over here, it's very short. It's like 5 seconds or something, but it's great. Dennis drum fills on Do It Again in the intro and throughout the song, just nailing it. It's so cool. And you know, the group they didn't have that many backing musicians during this tour, because as I mentioned in the beginning, by the end of '79 they kind of got rid of many backing musicians. So it's a tight group over here. They do have a few backing musicians, for example Poppy Figueroa, I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce that, but he was anyway like the second drummer and percussionist. And Mike Meros, obviously, and Ed Carter. And I believe there was someone too that I'm now forgetting. But anyway, like just a few, so not too many. And you got to remember, in the early '70s they also had Blondie and Ricky. So you know, those guys are not with them anymore. But then again, you have Brian and Bruce back. So you know, around the similar amount of musicians on stage. Carl is doing over here a lot of the lead guitar work. He's playing great solos throughout, and I love the pedal effects that they have in their guitars. I like to think about this show sort of the Beach Boys on steroids, or the hard rock version of the Beach Boys, and a lot of that is because of, first of all, Dennis Wilson and his fast tempo drumming. He's driving the whole thing, and the guitar sounds that are just not something that you'd expect in a Beach Boys show. Let's just put it that way. Bobby then takes the drums on Cotton Fields / Heroes and Villains, the little medley, which is interesting to me. I would like to know the story behind that, because both Brian and Dennis disappear off stage when they do that one. I've heard stories of it, like for example Dennis and Brian doing cocaine backstage, not on this show but otherwise, and Brian just not being happy with performing Heroes and Villains, that he just didn't want to be on stage when they did that. Either story is pretty sad. And it's cool how Dennis, when he comes back right at the end, at the basically the outro of Heroes and Villains, and he shouts at the audience, "We love you," and something else. he instantly, he just steals the show once again. His charisma is just so huge, and even just when you listen to the thing and you don't see him, when you hear his growls and that sort of that raspy voice, it's like he's so cool. You just gotta admit it, like he is just so cool, and vocally he's still very strong over here. And you know, I love raspy voices, so you know, to me he sounds great. Brian had his birthday the day before the show, but anyway, on this date they do that Happy Birthday Brian thing, and that's very cute. I really like that. I would just love to see the video of it too. And then the show continues with Keeping the Summer Alive, which is one of my favorite upbeat Beach Boys songs, by the way. I really love it. The album version too, because it has great cowbells and percussion, and I love those backing vocals. They are nerdy but cool at the same time. I truly just love this track. And the live version, it's more simpler, it's sort of more minimalistic, but it rocks a bit harder. Car's vocals, amazing, and even Brian just can't resist that groove. He really gets into it, and he's like bobbing his head over there and playing the piano, and it's super cool. Lady Linda, I prefer this version over the studio one on LA, because the production on the track on LA is a bit too limp to me. You know, it just sounds sort of sterile. But this one is super great, and I especially love that a cappella part at the end, and I love how Mike shouts, "Let's do it again," or one more time, and then they do the Alice like, "One more time?" What? And then they do the ultra part, you know, that a cappella part again, and I love that. They sound so great, and probably some sweetening was done to it later, I don't know, in studio, but anyway, it sounds so cool. I think it's a great song. I really like it. Surfer Girl, one of the highlights of the show, and a very interesting one, because if you just listen to it, sounds beautiful. Brian sings the bridge, and it's very heartfelt how Dennis introduces Brian just before his part. I really love that. But when you actually look at the show on video, there's some interesting things going on over here, and I would love to know your take on it, because I've seen different variations of the story. There's something going on. First of all, Dennis comes like in the front of the stage and sort of takes the show as a leading man, and Mike starts to, I mean, Dennis looks pretty, you know, happy, normal. I don't see him doing anything over here except just coming for the front of the stage, but Mike starts to sort of eyeballing him in a weird kind of way. And Dennis comes right next to him, and I think he kind of just grabs him too, and it's like they are singing, and Mike is sort of like, get out of here, like, it's kind of weird. But I mean, if you think about what happened the year before with them fighting, Dennis attacking Mike on stage and stuff like that, so I'm not blaming Mike. I mean, if they had something going on, like, you know, because Dennis was apparently, he was sort of a wild card on stage around that time period. You never really knew what he was going to pull off. But over here, he just seems really enjoying himself, and the audience loves him, and you know, the whole thing just looks and sounds great. But then the weirdest thing happens at the end of this track. I might be reading this too much, but to me something strange is going on stage, because Carl, out of all people, just rushes at the end of the song to Mike, starts to say something, but then Dennis grabs Carl and kind of forces him to bow. And then, out of all people, Al comes and sort of behind Mike reaches his hand to shake Dennis's hand. And It's so weird. And then after that, Carl still is shouting something off stage or to Mike, I'm not sure. But I would love to know what your take on that situation is, because something is happening there. I don't know what. It's because it's inaudible. I'm not sure if they cut off some dialogue or something, but something is happening over there. I would love to know if you know what, because it looks interesting. If you just listen to the show, there seems to be nothing wrong, but when you watch the video, it's kind of weird. But then we get a great version of Help Me Rhonda. Dennis comes to the piano that Brian has been playing throughout the show, and Brian goes, I believe, to Bruce's keys. It's kind of weird, but this was sort of a number that Dennis did during this time at least, and I love his little shout for Elton John, and he is just rocking out with the piano, and I love then Mike comes back to Dennis and everything seems to be fine, and he's sort of doing a little sort of like a solo, piano solo with one hand, and that's a great moment. Al's great vocals. It's one of my favorite versions of Help Me Rhonda. It just rocks so hard. And I love how throughout this song you can hear these, and throughout this whole concert too, but especially here, you can hear these sort of cool guitar feedback noises and stuff. You know, it has a fast tempo, super powerful, I love it. I Get Around, which is a great version. The rhythm guitar on this one is fabulous. Listen to that guitar sound, it rocks so hard. And I Get Around is... It's sort of a pre-punk song. I think it's in a lot of ways very underrated. I know it's a classic song, but it's not just a car song, some sort of happy car song. It's actually, composition-wise, I always felt it was super interesting and unique. And it sort of has very, to me at least, it has very much similarities to a lot of the Smile material, because it sort of consists of these little snippets of musical bits. But no matter what version, I love the song, whether it's Red Hot Chili Peppers or the original Beach Boys over here. It rocks hard, and I love how Mike at the end is shouting those yeahs and Dennis is giving those great drum fills, and it rocks hard. I love it. Surfing USA, a great version. Once again, Dennis steals the show with his sort of offbeat drumming. This is a fun song to play on drums, and you can see here Dennis having so much fun with it. He's goofing around, because it has this sort of start-stop rhythm. And anyway, the tempo over here is great. Dennis's fills are amazing. Sometimes kind of offbeat, weird, but that's sort of the whole point. And I love that. Then we get, as an encore, the classic You Are So Beautiful by Dennis. He started to do this song live at the late 70s, I believe, and he did it throughout the rest of his life. Not in each show, but maybe, you know, half of them or something. I don't know. Like, I don't know who decided whether he did that or not. I have no idea. But anyway, it sort of became his signature thing, and actually, he even wrote the song, which nobody really knows. Beach Boys fans do, but other people really don't. It's kind of sad. But he wrote it with Billy Preston at a party, and it's kind of sad to think, because this song is one of the all-time classic wedding songs, and you know, money didn't bring happiness to Dennis. But if you think about it and think about his financial, issues, and him losing his boat and them losing the recording studio and stuff like that, and how that sort of spiraled him too, because he lost the things that he loved the most in a way. So if you think about the track You Are So Beautiful and the millions that this track keeps on gaining in revenue, because it's just played all the time. And the fact that Dennis and his estate, they never got anything, like not a single penny of it. To me, it's kind of sad, but money doesn't make you happy. But I hope that at least one day Dennis would get that public recognition for writing it, because it sounds so Dennis, that signature part that everybody recognizes. It sounds just like anything Dennis wrote. But anyway, like, out of all the versions that you hear on different documentaries and on video snippets and stuff. This is probably my favorite. And I love how Dennis introduces the beat. Like, he's so honored somehow to introduce the Beach Boys at the end of the show. And I love how then, as the band comes back on stage and before they play those last few big encore songs, Carl gives a really heartfelt mention or shout out to Brian, and Dennis comes to Brian and shakes his hand, and Brian smiles, and you know, that's the classic moment that you see in a lot of documentaries. It's a really beautiful moment, really like that. And then we get great version of Good Vibrations. It's a long one because there's the audience participation thing that goes on for like 3 minutes, but it's a great version anyhow. And there's a cool ad-lib by Carl with the Blossom World, and then he's like, right? And that is so great because somehow that ad-lib has stuck with me. Each time I'm listening to the song, any live version of it, I'm sort of adding that part in my head. It's so great. He smiles after it, and really, really great. Anyway, just a great version, and you know, a classic song. What else can you say about it? And then we get a hard rock version of Barbara Ann, and I love it. It rocks so hard. You wouldn't believe it. It sounds a lot kind of like The Who doing Barbara Ann. My camera just overheated. I had already finished the whole review. But anyway, I guess I just rambled too much. Let's continue. And then we get the show closer. Fun. You know, classic way to end a Beach Boys show. But this version actually might be my favorite, all-time favorite of the whole song. You know, I prefer this even over the studio one. It's true, the studio one has stronger vocals because Brian and Mike's just that classic sound is there, and it's not over here, even though Mike's vocals over here are killer, but you know, otherwise maybe not as strong vocally. But instrumentally, I love somehow that guitar sound really works over here, and Dennis's great drumming, and I love that extended intro part. They sort of do this jamming thing before Carl then blasts off that famous Chuck Berry guitar lick, and then the outro as well is extended, and it ends greatly in massive fireworks. This ended up being the, you know, last show with the original members, all of them, in Europe. Dennis didn't come back to Europe anymore. He passed away in '83. And then, you know, a lot of things happened in the early 80s, which, you know, this is the darkest time of the Beach Boys. But this one show is a sort of in its own bubble, just like in the album cover of Keeping the Summer Alive. Outside of all the problems, you'd never guess that anything was really wrong with anything, you know, anybody. You know, Brian looks great, Dennis looks great, they are happy, they are performing well. You know, in '81, Carl left the group famously and came back in '82. He was disappointed with the same things that, you know, I mentioned in the beginning of the video, and he wanted to sort of rock out and do his solo thing, and so he did. And when he came back, Brian was in a lot of trouble. He was huge. He was not doing well, and his voice just kept deteriorating. He was just not healthy, and Dennis was spiraling fast. What ended up happening was that by the end of '82, they actually fired Brian out of the Beach Boys, and he had to go with the Landy program, and '82 ended up being the last full tour with Brian Wilson before the 2012 tour. So that's crazy thing to think about. He only appeared sporadically with the Beach Boys between '83 and, well, in the 2000s only with the 2012 tour. But, you know, crazy stuff. And, you know, Dennis, they fired Dennis out of the group again, I believe in the summer of '83. He just couldn't be relied anymore, and his voice was gone, and he was just a mess. And he ended up being homeless and, you know, died before he reached 40. And that's the saddest, you know, saddest part of the whole Beach Boys story to me, that he, you know, while it's Brian's story is a story of redemption, and if you look at Brian in the 2000s, he's like a newborn man. Him performing Smile and stuff, you know, him being with the Beach Boys in 2012, and to me it's very sad actually that from the early 80s nothing else has been released officially. And if you think about it, this is actually the last sort of thing that you have with Dennis Wilson. He's not on Keeping the Summer Alive, and the Beach Boys didn't release any studio albums, you know, before 85 after Keeping the Summer Alive. So this is the last sort of glimpse that you get at Dennis on stage performing. To me that's so sad, because there's still 3 years of live performances, and I know his voice deteriorated, but still I would love to hear more of him singing and playing, and no matter what, you know, because I really treasure this stuff, and you know, his performances, and he was just a soulful guy, and you really miss his voice. But anyway, this is it. I don't want to sort of start to ramble once again too much. What do you think about this show? What are your highlights? Let's continue in the comments. Take care. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.